Chronicles of Narnia, The Silver Chair by C.S. Lewis, Chapter 13, Underland Without the Queen. All felt that they had earned what Scrub called a breather. The witch locked the door on the Earthmen not to disturb her, so there was no danger for the interruption for the present. The first business was, of course, Puddlegum's burnt foot. A couple of clean shirts from the prince's bedroom, torn into strips and well greased on the inside with butter and salad oil off the supper table, made a fairly good dressing. When this had been applied, they all sat down and had a little refreshment and discussed the plans for escaping from the underworld. Rillian explained that there were quite a lot of outlets by which one could get out to the surface. He had been taken out to most of them one time or another. But he had never gone out alone, only with the witch, and he had always reached these outlets by going with a ship across the sunless sea. For the Earthmen could say if he went down to the harbour without the witch and the four strangers, and simply ordered a ship, no one could guess. But most likely they would ask awkward questions. On the other hand, the new outlet, the one for invasion of the overworld, was on the side of the sea, and only a few miles away. The prince knew that it was nearly finished. Only a few feet of earth divided the diggings from the outer air. It was even possible that it had now been quite finished. Perhaps the witch had come back, to tell him this and to start the attack. Even if it was not, they could probably dig themselves out by that route in a few hours, if they could only get there without being stopped, and if only they found the diggings unguarded. But those were the difficulties. "If you ask me," began Puddlegum, when Scrub interrupted. "I say," he asked, "what's that noise?" "I've been wondering for some time," said Jill. They had all, in fact, been hearing the noise until they had begun, and it increased so gradually that they did not know when they first noticed it. For a time it had been only a vague disquiet like gentle winds, or traffic very far away. Then it swelled to murmur like the sea. Then came rumblings and rushings, and now there seemed to be voices as well, also a steady roaring that was not voices. "By the line," said Prince Rillian, "it seems silent land has found a tongue at last." He rose, walked to the window, and drew aside the curtains. The others crowded around him to look out. The first thing they noticed was a great red glow. Its reflection made a red patch on the roof of the underworld 1,000 feet above them, so that they could see a rocky ceiling which perhaps had been hidden in darkness ever since this world was made. The glow itself came from the far side of the city, so that many buildings, grim and great, stood up blackly against it. But it was also cast its light down on many streets that ran from towards the castle, and those streets something very large was going on. The closely packed, silent cowards of Earthmen had vanished. Instead, there were these figures darting about by ones, twos, or threes. They behaved like people who do not want to be seen, lurking in shadow behind buttresses and doorways, then moving quickly across the open into fresh places of hiding. But the strangest thing of all, to anyone who knew the gnomes, was the noise. Shouts and cries came from all directions, but from the harbour there came a low, rumbling roar which grew steadily louder and was already shaking the whole city. "What's happening to the Earthmen?" said Scrub. "Is it them shouting?" "'Tis hardly possible," said the prince. "I've never heard one of the rascals so much speak as a loud voice in all the weary years of my bondage. Some near deliverer, I don't doubt." "And what's the red light over there?" asked Jill. "Is something on fire?" "If you ask me," said Puddlegum, "I would say that it was the central fires of Earth breaking out to make a new volcano. We'll be in the middle of it, I shouldn't wonder." "Look at that ship," said Scrub. "Why is it coming so quickly? No one's rowing it." "Look, look," said the prince. "The ship's already on that side of the harbour. It is in the street. Look, all the ships are driving into the city. By my head, the sea's rising. The flood is upon us." "Aslan be praised, this castle stands on high ground, but the water comes on grimly fast." "Oh, what can be happening?" cried Jill. "Fire and water and all those people dodging about the streets." "I tell you what it is," said Puddlegum. "That witch has laid a train of magic spells, so whatever she has killed, at the same moment her whole kingdom would fall to pieces. She's that sort that wouldn't much mind dying herself if she knew that the chap who killed her was going to be burned, or buried, or drowned 5 minutes later." "Hast hit it, friend Wiggle," said Prince. When our swords hacked off the witch's head, that stroke ended all her magic works, and though the deep lands are falling to pieces, we are looking on the end of the underworld." "That's it, sir," said Puddlegum, "unless it should happen to be the end of the whole world." "But what, are we just going to stay here and wait?" gasped Jill. "Not by my counsel," said the prince. "I would save my horse, Coalback, and the witch's Snowflake, a noble beast and worthy of a better mistress, which are both stabled in the courtyard. After that, let us make shift to get out high ground and pray that we shall find an outlet. The horses can carry 2 at each need. If they put them to do it, they may outstrip the flood." "Will your highness not put on an armour?" asked Puddlegum. "I don't like the look of those," and he pointed down to the street. Everyone looked down. Dozens of creatures, and now that they were close, they were obviously Earthmen, were coming up from the direction of the harbour, but they were not moving like an aimless crowd. They behaved like modern soldiers in an attack, making rushes and talking in cover, anxious not to be seen from the castle windows. "I dare not see the inside of that armour again," said the prince. "I rode in it as a movable dungeon. It stinks of magic and slavery, but I will take the shield." He left the room and returned with a strange light in his eyes a moment later. "Look, friends," he said, holding out the shield toward them. "An hour ago it was black and without device, and now this." The shield had turned bright as silver, and on it, red as blood or cherries, was the figure of a lion. "Doubtless," said the prince, "this signifies that Aslan will be our good lord, whether he means us to live or die. And that's all for that. Now by my counsel we shall kneel and kiss his likeness, and then all shake hands with one another as true friends that may shortly be parted, and then let us descend to the city and make the adventure that he sent us." And they all did as the prince had said, but when Scrub shook hands with Joel, he said, "So long, Joel. Sorry I've been a funk and so ratty. I hope he gets safe home." And Joel said, "So long, Eustace. I'm sorry I've been such a pig." This was the first time they had never ever used Christian names, because one didn't do it at school. The prince unlocked the door, and they all went down to stairs. 3 of them with drawn swords, and Joel with a drawn knife. The attendants had vanished, and the great room at the front of the prince's stairs was empty. The grey, doleful lamps were still burning, and by their light they had no difficulty in passing gallery after gallery, descending stairway after stairway. The noises of the outside castle were not so easily heard here as they had been in the room above. Inside the house all was still as death and deserted. It was as they turned a corner into the great hall, into the ground floor, that they met their first Earthman, a fat, whitish creature with a very pig-like face, who was gobbling up all the remains on the tables. It squealed like the squeal of very like a pig's, and darted under the bench, whisking its long tail out of Puddicombe's reach in the nick of time. Then it rushed away through the far door too quickly to be followed. From the hall they came out into the courtyard. Joel, who went riding school in the holidays, had just noticed the smell of a stable. A very nice, honest, homely smell it is to meet in a place like Underland. When Eustace said, "Great Scott, look at that!" A magnificent rocket had risen from somewhere beyond the castle walls and had broken into green stars. "Fireworks!" said Joel in a puzzled voice. "Yes," said Eustace, "but you can't imagine those earth people letting them off for fun. It must be a signal. And it means no good to us, I'll be bound," said Puddlecombe. "Friend," said the prince, "once a man is launched on an adventure like this, he must bid farewell to hopes and fears. Otherwise, death or deliverance will both come too late and save his honour and his reason. Ho, my beauties!" He was now opening the stable door. "Here, cousins, steady, Coleback. Slowly now, Snowflake. You're not forgotten." The horses were both frightened by the strange lights and the noises. Joel, who had been so cowardly about going through a black hole between one cave and another, went in without fear between the stamping and snorting beasts, and she and the prince and them saddled and bridled in a few minutes. Very fine they looked as they came out into the courtyard, tossing their heads. Joel mounted Snowflake, and Puddlegum got up behind her. Eustace got up behind the prince on Coleback. Then, with a great echo of hoofs, they rode out into the main gateway into the street. "Not much danger of being burnt. That's the bright side of it," observed Puddlegum, pointing to their right. There, hardly hundreds of yards away, lapping against the walls of houses, was water. "Courage," said the prince. "The road there goes down steeply. That wood has climbed only half up the greatest hill in the city. It might come near in the first half hour and come no nearer in the next two. My fear is more of that." And he pointed to a great hall earthman with boar's tusks, followed by 6 others assorted shapes and sizes, who had just darted out of the side street and stepped into the shadow of the houses where no one could see them. The prince led them, aiming always in the direction of the glowing light, but a little to the left of it. His plan was to get around the fire, if it was a fire, onto high ground and hope that they might find their way to the new diggings. Unlike the other 3, he seemed to be almost enjoying himself. He whistled as he rode, and snagged snatches of an old song about Corin Thunderfirst of Archenland. The truth is that he was so glad about being free from his long enchantment that all danger seemed a game in his comparison, but the rest found it an eerie journey. Behind him was the sound of clashing and entangled ships and a rumble of collapsing buildings. Overhead was the great patch of lurid light roof of the underworld. Ahead was the mysterious glow, which did not seem to grow any bigger. From the same direction came a continual hubbub of shouts, screams, catcalls, laughter, squeals, and bellowings, and fireworks of all sorts rose in the dark air. No one could guess what they meant. Nearer to them, the city was partly lit up by the red glow, and partly by the very different light of the Dirigrome lamps. But there were very many places where neither of these lights fell, and those places were jet black. And in and out of those places shapes of earthmen were darting and slipping all the time, always with their eyes fixed on the travellers, trying to keep out of sight themselves. There were big faces and little faces, huge eyes like fishes' eyes and eyes like bears'. There were feathers and bristles, horns and tusks, noses like whipcord, and chins so long that they looked like beards. Every now and then a group of them would get too big or come too near. Then the prince would brandish his sword and make a show of charging them, and the creatures with all manner of hootings, squeakings, and cluckings would dive away into the darkness. But when they had climbed many steep streets and were far away from the flood, and almost out of town on the inland side, it began to be more serious. They were now close to the red glow, and nearly on a level with it, though they had still could not see what it really was. By its light they could see their enemies more clearly. Hundreds, perhaps a few thousands of gnomes were all moving towards it. They were doing so in short rushes, and whenever they stopped they turned and faced the travellers. "If your highness asked me," said Puddlegum, "I'd say those fellows were meaning to cut us off in front." "That's my thought too, Puddlegum," said the prince, "and we can never fight our way through so many. Hark you, let us ride forth close by the edge of the yonder house, and even as we reach it, do slip off into its shadow. The lady and I will go forward a few paces. Some of the devils will follow us, I doubt not. They are thick behind us. Do you, who have long arms, take one alive if you may. It passes your ambush. We may get a true tale of it, or learn what is their crawl against us." "But won't the others all come rushing at us to rescue the one we catch?" said Joel, a voice not so steady as she tried to make it. "Then, madam," said the prince, "you shall see us die fighting around you, and you must commend yourself to the line. Now, good Puddlegum." The Marshwiggle slipped off into the shadow as quickly as a cat. The others for a sickening minute or so went forward at a walk. Then suddenly from behind him there broke out a series of blood-curdling screams mixed with the familiar voice of Puddlegum saying, "Now then, don't cry out before you're hurt, or you will be hurt, see? Anyone would think it was a pig being killed." "That was a good hunting," exclaimed the prince, immediately turning Cole back and coming back to the corner of the house. "Eustace," he said, "of your courtesy, take Coleback's head." Then he dismounted, and all gazed in silence while Puddlegum put out his catch into the light. It was a most miserable little gnome, only about 3 feet long. It had a sort of ridge like a cock's comb, only hard, on the top of its head, little pink eyes, and a mouth and a chin so large that its round face looked like that of a pygmy hippopotamus. If they had not been in such a tight place, they would have burst into laughter at the sight of it. "Now, Earthman," said the prince, standing over it and holding its sword point very near the prisoner's neck, "speak up like an honest gnome, and you shall go free. Play the knave with us, and you are but a dead Earthman. Good Puddlegum, how can it speak while you hold its mouth tight shut?" "No, and it can't bite either," said Puddlegum. "If I had the silly soft hands of you humans you have been saving your highness's reverence, I'd have been all over blood by now. Yet even a Marshwiggle gets tired of being chewed." "Sirrah," said the prince to the gnome, "one bite and you die. Let his mouth open, Puddlegum." "Ooh, squealed the Earthman. Let me go, let me go. It isn't me, I didn't do it." "Didn't do what?" asked Puddlegum. "Whatever your honours say I did do," asked the creature. "Tell me your name," said the prince, "and what your Earthmen are about all today." "Oh, please, your honours, please, kind gentlemen," whimpered the gnome. "I promise I will not tell the Queen's Grace anything I say." "The Queen's Grace, as you call her," said the prince sternly, "is dead. I killed her myself." "What?" cried the gnome, opening its ridiculous mouth wide and wide in astonishment. "Dead? The Queen is dead, and by your honour's hand?" I have a huge sigh of relief and added, "Why, then your honour is a friend." The prince withdrew his sword an inch or so, and Puddlegum let the creature sit up. It looked round on the 4 travellers with its twinkling red eyes, and chuckled once or twice, and began.